Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcia Tyler, and I'm the Chief of Staff at the YWCA of the City of New York. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming out to our Salon series, Election 2016 and Beyond, Shaping Women's Equity Agenda. And tonight we're going to have a wonderful discussion around women's issues and the direction that we need to be going, strategies and tactics that we need to be taking to move our agenda forward as our election season draws near. I'd like to introduce our moderator this evening, Zenaida Mendez. And Zenaida is a director of Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Barrio Firehouse Community Media. So I'd like to turn it over now to Zenaida Mendez, and she will introduce our panel.
What I would like to do is for each of the panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their work, and then we will follow up with a little bit of dialogue. Yes.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Rose Pierre-Louis. First part of my career was focused as an attorney in public interest law, representing survivors of domestic violence in courts throughout New York State, working on policy issues. In 2005, served from 2006 to 2014 as Manhattan Deputy Borough President. And then from 2014 to 2016, worked in the de Blasio administration for a feminist mayor, which was fantastic, and serving as commissioner for the mayor's office to combat domestic violence as senior advisor of the New York City Commission on Gender Equity. And I'm happy to be here today as a newly appointed board member for Eleanor's Legacy, which is an incredible organization founded in the spirit and recognition of the contributions of Eleanor Roosevelt, working to get pro-choice Democratic women elected to state office. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Zenaida. Always great to see you.
Hi, my name is Stacy Melle, and I just want to start by talking a little bit about my background. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm Black and German, and I was born in the city, but then we moved to the suburbs. So I feel like I've always been crossing back and forth between borders, just in every sense of the word. And in doing that, I learned early that politics mattered, government matters, having a voice matters. And so when I thought, okay, what am I going to do with my life? I thought, well, I want to work in government, but I want to be a writer. Well, a more practical route, I thought, okay, fine. So I went to GW for school. But it was great because it was the fall of 1992, and that's when President Bill Clinton was running, and I just jumped in, and from then on, I worked in the Clinton administration, in the campaign in the administration. So I was able to work in government at a very young age, and it was like the best of times. Then I came back, I went abroad, I came back, and I was a staff person, but then everything happened with Monica and impeachment, so it was the worst of times. But during that time, I was radicalized, really, and I felt, it's very important to work in government. We need good people, but I'm better suited to be outside government. I'm better suited to be able to speak out more freely, to be an advocate. And so since that time, I've been writing, I've been teaching writing, I've worked in different arts groups. Most recently, I worked for the Afghan Women's Writing Project that was dedicated to really amplifying these women's voices from overseas. And I live in Harlem now, and I have a group called Harlem Against Harlem Against Violence, Homophobia, and Transphobia, and I also curate a reading series there. So I try to speak out, and I write, and be a New Yorker.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Peeler-Allen, and I am co-founder of Higher Heights, which is a national organization focused on mobilizing and electing Black women. And a little bit about my background. I grew up outside of Washington, and politics was always something that was talked about because it was on the local news. And though my parents were not in politics per se, they were political junkies. And I was in Washington the same time you were, working at a lobbying firm. And I remember printing out killing a printer, printing out the Star Report. But came to New York and started working in New York politics, and that is where I really honed my skills, and then also saw a huge vacuum. Because as I was traveling with candidates who were running from everything from governor to mayor to city controller, I was privy to be in these spaces with all sorts of people, and they were people who were discussing the agenda for the Black and brown community. But I noticed I was the only Black or brown person in the room. So my colleague, or a good friend of mine, she was a staff person and I was a consultant for an elected official. After many years of working in this space, said, you know what, we need to start something for ourselves, because we know just from our personal networks, there's about 60 or 70 Black women who are engaged in the process, but they're not invited to these tables. So how do we make sure that our voices are part of the discourse when decisions are being made? And the best way to do that is to make sure that more women are around the table, because we know when we have more diverse voices around the table, better decisions are made. So we are focused right now at Higher Heights about turning out the vote. 12 days. Oh my God. But it is, it's really amazing as we've been traveling across the country and talking to women about their priorities, about the things that they want to hear, about the things that are motivating them to the polls. And it's beyond candidates at this point, because we know that we're voting because our lives depend on it. Because our future, we've seen so many rollbacks at the state and local levels, from pay, organized labor, women's rights, reproductive rights, childcare. The list goes on, because people have not been engaged at the local level. And we know that Black women are, in the last 2 election cycles, Black women turned out at 70% of 70% of the eligible Black women to vote came out to vote. That is the highest turnout of any demographic group in the country. We know that when Black women come out, we tip the scales in elections. Terry McAuliffe owes his job in the state of Virginia to Black women. Sherrod Brown owes his job to Black women of Ohio. And that is a narrative that is not being discussed. So we're very focused on making sure that the headlines on November 9th are that Black women showed up and showed out and tipped the scales in elections across the country.
I always been a member now, because in 1982 I have been a member of the National Organization for Women, and I was the past president in New York State for that organization. So I am the older of 3 sisters, and I have 3 daughters, and I have a granddaughter. So this is one of the reasons why I do what I do every day, because I know what it is to be oppressed. As someone who grew up in the Dominican Republic, I came here when I was 13, because in 1965, if you don't know, 40,000 U.S. Marines invaded the Dominican Republic. So I also know what it is to live in a paradise invaded by soldiers. So that's why we would talk about foreign affairs, and why that whatever happened in the United States affect everyone globally. But let's focus on New York for now. Women in New York have made considerable advances in recent years, but still face inequalities that often prevent them from reaching their full potential. The wage gap in New York has narrowed a higher percentage of women, and more women have bachelor degrees. And women are more and more likely to be in professional and managerial position now. Yet, as in all other states, women in New York are less likely than men to be in the labor force and more likely to live in poverty, especially older women. Here in New York, we have a large population of young women and a large population of older women. Women also continue to be underrepresented in the state legislature, only 22%. We know that very, very well, especially some of us, we go to Albany pretty often. The current trends continue. Women in New York will get equal pay in 2049. I'm not going to tell you my age again, but we have a lot of work to do. And I believe that the only way that we can achieve what we need to achieve is by transforming government. And when we talk about transforming government, we're talking about people like you and us, people with good heart, people who really want to make changes and do transformation, taking over government. We cannot continue to let hoodlums govern the United States, each state in the city. We can. We are for sale. So we have people of good sense, we have to take over government. Women with good sense, we have to take over government. Because if you are not born as a millionaire, you have to work all your life. And you have to depend on the system. And the system was created to be fair to everyone. Why is it not working? Because the people who are now in charge are not fair people. So we have to be in charge. We have to take responsibility. So I would like to ask the first question. The reason why I am so concerned about the state of affairs of the United States is because, let's start with Kimberly.
Ooh, just one. I think my biggest concern is that there seems to be a vacuum at decision-making tables across the country of voices, not just Black women, but anyone who is not a white male over the age of 50. And the fewer voices that are engaged, the worse things seem to be.
I feel like over the history of our country, it's always been a fight to expand the circle of who's considered a citizen. And I think we are always fighting I think we have a lot of politicians, a lot of people that we fall into this trap of we only care about the people who are in our circle. So I think it's a lot of problems come down to I can't see your crisis or your problem because it's not happening in my room or happening in my world. And then there's the issue of how our economic system works, where if I'm not trying to hypercritique capitalism here, but if I, if I only see you as someone that I can either use or extract money from, and I don't see your full humanity, that allows me to gouge you, that allows me to create laws that are, just strip you of important things. So I feel like it's this constant, we're still trying to see everyone's full humanity. And I think the more we can do that, the better things will be.
So I think, I certainly echo what everyone else has said. I also think when you look at states like New York, where women are the majority of the population, yet it's not reflected at all levels of government. And there's certainly efforts by elected officials to change that. But we're still talking about first. I'm still hearing people, well, she was the first person. I mean, in 2016, we're talking whether it's in politics, in government, in corporate America, we're still defining people as first. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is succession planning, right? Because there is an issue in certain communities, but certainly for women, who's going to leave the breadcrumbs for the next, and I don't mean like breadcrumbs, I'm giving you breadcrumbs. I'm talking about who's going to leave you the trail so that you can come and not only be where I was, but you're going to exceed me by light years. So I feel like that's a conversation that we need to talk about more and understand that empowerment is not about you. Empowerment is the person that's going to be seated in the chair after you, and what do you do to advance that person? That's really what my definition of empowerment. And how do we come together as women of color, as women from the suburbs, from cities, from Hispaniola, from all of these countries from around the world? We are all united as women around our humanity, our desire to move each other forward, understanding we are the new majority. So how do we claim that fully?
As some of you might know, the United States Constitution do not have an equal right amendment. So what do you think what is the next step that we have to take to recapture that movement that was in the 80s and the 90s to have equal rights for us?
Elect Hillary Clinton president of the United States. I mean, clearly there's so much at stake this November, and certainly this is one of them. And I think it's important for us to think very thoughtfully about what are the things that are going to be. 8 years is, I mean, it's a new generation. So we need to be very conscientious about who are going to be the people that identify, share our perspectives, share our views. And for me, I want to, in the next 8 years, we're very similar in age. I feel really grateful to have seen the first African-American president elected. I'm very much hoping that I can say that in my lifetime that we elected the first woman president, and that woman, Hillary Clinton, is committed to so many of the things that all of us have been fighting for a very long time.
I would say to move the ERA forward, we have to change the narrative. There is, I've heard conversations with college students, younger women who have grown up in a time where the Secretary of State, for the most part, has only been a woman. You know, we are making, you know, we've had a, you know, Hillary ran a very strong campaign in 2008. She looks like she's going to get it in 2016, and folks are seeing in places, well, you know, women seem to be doing it. You know, why do we need the ERA? What is the advantage to doing it? That's Gloria Steinem. That's the bra burners. That's the, you know, my grandmother's generation. I don't know why it's relevant to me. So I think to be able to move, like, you almost have to restart the conversation about the importance of the ERA and all of the things that will happen once it is truly codified in the Constitution. I think it's a definite education campaign, and Hillary is a piece of it, but she almost is a deterrent to starting it, to restarting the conversation, because people will say, oh, well, you know, why do we need to go down this road when we've already made this progress? Just like people are like, oh, well, we're in a post-racial America because we've elected a black president. Black Lives Matter, you know, with everything that's been going on, particularly over the, you know, really, it never really stopped, but with the advent of body cameras and whatnot, it's just more and more prominent. We, as much as we are making very big strides on a very visible level, on a very micro level, and in our personal lives, there's so much more work that needs to be done. And I think making that connection is going to be critical to really being able to move the ERA forward.
Can I just piggyback just one? So I think also, you know, when you're thinking about certainly over the last 8 years and the level of information and data that supports any argument that someone would put forth, when you think about the Center for Women and Families and the great work that they are doing to really show you about the wage gap and what the wage gap is when you look at it from the perspective of women of color, it's a much bigger wage gap. There's so many incredible organizations that are doing such important policy work to help create that new narrative. And I do think there is momentum and recognition, not only amongst women, but I do think there are progressive men that understand that for the security and the strength of families that this is vital. But I do think it's important to acknowledge the work that's being done by many organizations that are really shining the light on this and doing it very consistently and very powerfully.
Just briefly add, the thing I think is, I was just thinking about recently and on a smaller scale, just how important Title IX has been. And the huge changes in our society and how schools, you can't recognize, I mean, you would never recognize schools 40 years ago or 30 years ago. So even on that small scale, you know, let's ramp up.
But the United States doesn't have an educational amendment, the United States Constitution. So how do you think this affects community of color, and especially women of color, not having a national education, public education amendment in the Constitution of the United States.
Well, can you just tell a little bit more about how you ideally, what do you think, what would you like to see?
Well, because we don't have education amendment in the United States Constitution, the national government, Washington, will not feel responsible for the education of the citizens of the United States. So each state decide how they're going to divide
Right.
the education part. So who loses? We can see the pie to prison when you look at that. Because when you go back to the federal government, they say, well, go to your governor, go to your state legislature.
Right. Well, I just have to say, I appreciate your fresh thinking on this, because it shows I feel kind of beaten, like browbeaten, and like, no, it is states' rights, you can't go against it, you know, and it's important to jump out of that, and so I'm not going to say any more, because I have to think more about this, so is there someone who'd like to?
Well, I guess I'm gonna have to say something. You know, it's very interesting. I was born in the 60s, in 1964, and was born in Cleveland, Ohio. Parents came from Haiti with the hope and a dream of advancing themselves, their family. And when we moved to New York after I was 5 years old, one of the most important decisions they made was where they were going to live, because they wanted access to a good education. And I was raised on Long Island. And fortunately, my parents had the ability to do that. Many families do not have the ability to do that. And I think that disparity, depending upon your tax bracket or neighborhood or zip code, really dictates the quality of education. So you can go literally down, you know, in northern Manhattan, right, starting from the top and going further into central business district, and you're going to see disparities in education. And this is a narrative that is being talked about all around the world. And so I think one of the things we need to be able to talk about is, how does everyone have a level playing field? How do we ensure that it doesn't matter where you're raised in the United States, that everyone is going to have access to a quality education that is understanding that education gives you the tools to compete in society. It gives you a formation. It is a place where you have the opportunity to dream and to think about your future. How do we give everyone that head start? How do we think about that? And I think before you even get to an amendment, there has to be an agreement that this is a civil right. This is something that everyone is entitled to, and that we are unified in ensuring that everyone has it. And I think right now we're seeing different programs and entitlements that really are missing the mark and not really helping students in the communities that you're talking
So
about.
health, housing, and education
Yep.
are based in human rights. And right now in New York City, I mean, my children are grown, thank God, but I have a 2.5-year-old granddaughter. It is a nightmare to find a good school. We talk about the mayor having pre-K, but what happens, you have your young person in pre-K, who's pick up that person at 3 p.m.? It's beautiful that you have all day. When you say all day, pre-K is from 8:30 to 3 o'clock. So you still need somebody to pick up the kid. And then the quality of education, high quality education. And you see now, and I have to say, I agree with the mayor de Blasio. Why are we going to take a public education money to give it to charter school where they handpick the brightest of the brightest? We have to carefully look at that. And that has to do directly from the ground up, where we are today, to get to that constitutional amendment that is really, really needed. You know, and in the whole all industrialized country, make education a priority. And that's why they don't have so many millions in jail, in prison. Because if you are educated, you have most likely will find a way to make a good living and don't have to, you know, depend in other situation.
What I will say, as someone who worked in the administration, I felt very privileged to be a part of an administration that really looked at these issues of income inequality and really thinking about it not only through the lens of gender, but understanding that across the spectrum for all New Yorkers. And certainly with universal pre-K, I know for the First Lady, issues of daycare, mental health, things that government has never really talked about on the city level. And I know these are the things that the mayor and the first lady and the administration are extremely passionate about. And, I think people always lose sight. It's only been 3 years, right? And so much has been accomplished. And I really salute the mayor and the first lady, not because I worked for them, but they're also my mayor and first lady as well. And some of you know from the Commission on Gender Equity some of the work that we're doing and some of the issues that you only hoped and prayed that a mayor would talk about, that this mayor has talked about. So I think I'd be remiss not to, as someone who's been in the administration, talk about some of the key successes.
Now,
If I could just add quickly. First, I just want to say I'm always just in awe of what happened with all-day pre-K, because I feel like that's a real deliverable. You can go live in many cities. I mean, not to make this de Blasio commercial, but it was like, that was something, a real thing, I feel what I'm worried about with the dream of an education amendment, I feel like it gets back to, I feel like we have too many people in our country who feel that, they're the citizens, right? And then there's the others who are trying to use up social services, or they're trying to get money from the government, or they're trying to take what should be theirs, and are not yet seeing all of us as in this together, as all of us as full, equal citizens of America. Because I feel like if we got to that point, then it would be natural to want to take care of that, make sure everyone had what they needed. But I feel like we're fighting against this hardness, and we got to soften that up because, because you look at European countries who can provide. I mean, and maybe their days are numbered of being able to provide such a strong safety net for their people. But there's more of a sense of, we're a people, and we're still trying to come together as a people. So.
No, definitely. The next president of the United States will be able to appoint not only one justice to the Supreme Court, but maybe more than one. How would that affect women, in particular women of color?
Where do you begin?
Yeah, no,
It'll be huge. One candidate has already said he is, his first priority is to roll back Roe versus Wade, which has been, life-changing for generations of women in this country. And that, I think, just brings the slippery slope of, states' rights and not just reproductive health, but when these issues are going to come forward around pay equity and all of the issues, really, and all issues are women's issues because we are the intersections of everything. It's all going to have such a huge ramifications for a woman's ability to provide for her family, take care of herself, and secure her future. So those are the issues that will be decided by the next Supreme Court, regardless of who's sitting on it. And I just hope that whoever is in those seats are really representing the concerns of women.
I'll just say that there's chaos because nothing is forever, and then there's hope because nothing is forever. And I feel like we're always going to have to be fighting to get people on the court or to support presidents who will put, good people on the court. And I guess we just always have to be ready to fight. That's all I can say with that.
I mean, I agree with everything that was just said. I think for me, when I think about it, it is not only for the next generation, but future generations, whoever's appointed to the Supreme Court is going to make decisions that are vital not only to women, but to children and to families and to communities, and certainly communities of color, and I agree with what Kimberly just said. I think one of the things that I find frustrating is like, these are women's issues, and this is the the issues that the rest of America cares about. And I'm like, no. I care about education, affordable housing, healthcare, seniors, transportation. All of these things are part of discussions around income inequality, and I hope that one of the things, whoever is the next president, is that we're able to talk more multidimensional about these issues.
I love that word, multidimensional. One of the issues that women are never asked are economic issue and war. And our sons and daughters are the one, joining the army, because now we have the U.S. Armed Forces in the high school recruiting them before they graduate. Right now, United States has 7 wars going on. They are part. This morning, we saw how they bombed Syria. The United States part of that. The excuse is ISIS. But the collateral damage is women and children. Why we don't hear in the debate anyone talking about foreign policy? I haven't heard. I've seen the 3 debates. No, it's not a priority. The priority is who grabbed what, where. I mean, it is so embarrassing what we've seen in the last 6 months in the United States when it comes to the state or the presidency in the United States. I mean, this is the role model. Everywhere you go, it's like, oh, the United States, United States. What is going to happen after November 8th? What are people going to emulate after this? I don't even have the words. Because it is, like I said, it is shameful. It's embarrassing. The discussion that you have 2 presidential candidates talking about when you have 80 million people watching them all over the world. What can we do to somehow, maybe in our community, maybe elevate the discourse, so whoever becomes president, this will never happen again. That we know the issues that matters to us, and that we make sure that those are the issues that are going to be discussed. What can we do to turn that around?
Well, I think we've had a special, for those of us who aren't particularly hawkish, I think we've had a special problem with the Hillary Clinton candidacy and her different candidacies, because I think she's always had to project, a strength or somehow, I think she's felt she's had the need to convince the men in the room or the general, or even the women in the room, that she can be the defender or, the military leader. I'm pleased. I think this was a big vulnerability for her during the primary. I think a lot of people supported Bernie Sanders because of her hawkishness. I'm hoping that if she wins, that she will not feel the same kind of pressure to show that she's the strongest, or she's not afraid to, that she doesn't have to put a performance on. And I feel, I'm hoping, I'm sensing a little bit of an evenness that maybe wasn't there before, and that, but the reality is when you are president, you are a leader of the American empire, right? And we have to we have to find a way, hopefully at home, to get out of this, to not be passive empire builders, to say no to war. And if she wins, I believe there's going to be a very strong outcry that we can't be aggressive in the world as we've been, that we have to find a way to be peacemakers. So I feel like it's going to be our responsibility just to push. She's going to need to hear from people that it's not okay just to be aggressive and to keep dropping bombs on people throughout the world.
I think there is also a need to kind of shift the mindset, because we are definitely trending toward an isolationist period in this country, where we are, because of the huge wealth gap that continues to grow and the shrinking middle class, people are very concerned with Maslow hierarchy of needs. Food, shelter, personal safety, and that has really dictated the conversation, because even when they have gotten into some sort of policy conversation during the debates, it has been very domestic driven. And I think that is very much them tuning into people's very real concerns about being able to put food on the table. I question how both of them will deal with some of those issues about the basics of how you're going to put a chicken in every pot. But I think when Americans are able to think beyond the next paycheck, it allows us to be able to really have a more comprehensive thought process and conversation about world affairs. Though because you can't put a chicken in every pot, that's why recruiters are picking up so many particularly black and brown recruits to go into the armed forces, because they know, well, if you can't get a job, go into the Army, because you know that you'll get paid and you'll have a pension if you do 7 years or whatever it is. So I think it's definitely tied to the domestic economy and how people are feeling about their personal security, why the conversation unfortunately has not elevated to that higher level to discuss more international affairs and what is happening in Syria and the Middle East and across the board.
Not to add much more than what's been said, I think it's also important to highlight the positive impacts of the military. My father is at Fort Bragg. He's a physician, and he sees firsthand how the military has really been transformational in the lives of many people and has created incredible economic opportunity, leadership opportunity. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced, and is not so black and white, so to speak, when we're talking about the military. I am hopeful in being able to see Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. I thought she was very effective, and I think she made tough decisions, and I think that is part of what you will need to do as an executive. I think already, I think the debate, if you really look at it, I don't think it was necessarily I think it was very one-sided as to how these conversations sort of shifted into things that were not so policy-based. I think this is her strength. This is where she shines. I have no doubt that she's already beginning to think about very thoughtfully, as women do when they lead. And we know this from other women around the world, that I have every expectation that she will take into all the things that we're talking about, and I think will be incredibly, thoughtful, progressive, all of these things in terms of how she approaches.
One of the things when Michelle Bachelet became president of Chile, she had half of her cabinet female. Now, what can we do to ensure that if Hillary Clinton become elected, we would have a greater, balance in terms of male and female in the White House and in her cabinet? I'm not talking about her cabinet, people who she's going to listen to every single day about policy. Is there what can we do?
I can start it off. We know many people. We know many people. I mean, she is probably one of the most diverse campaigns that I've seen, with women at the forefront. Mignon Moore, Zerlina Maxwell. There are a lot of her communications folks. So I think women think in that way. How do you do the big tent? How do you make sure that it's diverse and reflects the entire community? And I think if you read New York Magazine, a number of media outlets have really focused on the fact that she spent a lot of time, and to, it's very hard for me to say his name, Donald Trump's credit, there are women that are in leadership positions. Kellyanne Conway, I may not agree with her, but I have to say, I think she's impressive. And I think we have to be able to look at women who we may not even agree with and say, I see you, I recognize you, I think you're smart, right? May not like your guy, but you're smart. And so I think this is something similar to what we've seen at the city level here in New York, that we will see that Hillary Clinton will show what diversity really looks like.
Yeah, I would just echo that her staff has always been, I mean, she's always had these mighty women around her. And I don't see why she would change if she became president. I think she would just elevate. That's very exciting to me.
Yeah, just piggybacking on what everybody has said. I mean, I know my conversations with folks within the campaign, that they have been very deliberate from day one that they wanted to take the demographics of this country and reflect that in the staffing. So 51% of the staff are female, and they have worked from there to find people from all demographic groups who can lead in various positions on the campaign. And I think that is something that is going to be very important. The challenge, I think, is going to be when there are these kind of one-shot places like the Supreme Court. So does she put a black woman? Does she put a black man? Does she put another Latina? Or an Asian? Everybody is going to be angling for those spots. So I think it's going to. That's where I think there could be some challenges and some minefields for her to navigate, but I think that's a happy problem to have, which she has a full slate of 10 candidates and they're all people of color. I think that's a happy problem.
We want to open the floor to our great women and men that are here with us today, so we are ready to take your questions.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm one of the members of the Fire Council.
Vice President.
I'll do the Hillary shimmy. So one of the things that we talk a lot about as a Fire Council is intersectionality, and that's a guiding value both for the YWCA and for our work. Is there any way in particular that you have seen that play out in your work, and are there any ways, and we have this as a principle that we think is important, is there anything in particular that you've done from that angle that you found to help elevate your work, or places where you see more of that needed? Like any best practices or worst practices that we should avoid?
I would say I don't work in that lens of intersectionality. I just do the work. And I speak to issues, other people will say, "Oh, this is intersectionality." I'm just getting it done because Black women we're veterans, we're small business owners, we are parents, we are children. We have all of these elements, and all of these issues are relevant to us. So just making sure that when we're speaking on the issues, we're speaking on all of the issues, and we're as informed as we possibly can be about those issues and the impact that it has on Black women's lives. I had a conversation with someone around some work, and they were trying to compartmentalize people. And I said, well, as a Black woman, who do I call? Do I call the women's desk, or do I call the African American desk? And they said, well, you should call the African American desk. I was like, but what about the women's issues? So I think it's changing, just continuing to do the work and push the envelope so that you can't let people get off saying, oh, well, women's issues, or, we're really talking just to white women and saying, well, what are, has your team come together and really talked about how this intersection comes together and how you can talk to various groups using culturally competent language to really move the issue forward. Because I think that is the challenge of people just say, oh, I'm talking to people through the women's lens. Well, you're talking to Asian women who are from predominantly Muslim countries, so there are certain things that culturally are not going to fly, and you're not going to get the response that you need. So just making sure that that is always part of the conversation, I think would definitely be a best practice, and don't let your foot off the gas.
I totally agree, and it makes me happy to hear it. It makes me happy to talk about it. And I think only thing I would say is I don't have a best practice at this point, but even just taking the time to think about it, I think is very meaningful. Even we got a list of prospective questions that we might talk about tonight. I think the first question was, what do women voters have at stake in this coming election? Seems like the obvious big question. But then I sat and thought about it. I'm like, well, if you're a Muslim woman, your answer might be different than if you're white lesbian, or if you're Asian, or the problem is we're still having all these it's never just going to be one answer. But then I felt like, okay, what's good though is I feel like we're all working towards understanding and solidarity and thinking about each other's experiences. So that's all I ask.
So I think that's a really great question. So thank you for asking that. And I think always feeling that push-pull, like, am I a Black woman? Am I like a West Indian? Am I a New Yorker? Am I an Ohioan? And I would say the same thing. My race and my gender are inextricably tied, and it's very hard. I really can't separate the two. What I can say to you from my experience in government, having worked for two very progressive elected officials that put women first, and working for Scott Stringer and working for Bill de Blasio, is by bringing together not only women to the forefront, but a diverse administration allowed for those kinds of discussions, which oftentimes are kind of uncomfortable to have. But I do think what I feel better about is that we're hearing these kinds of questions, and it can be done in a form, in an environment that is not sort of off-putting. But to your point is, how do we understand that whether you're white, you're Latina, you're Black, you're Asian, you're Muslim, that there is a commonality of experience. There's a commonality of issues that impact us all. And that the successes of Zenaida is my success. Your success is my success. You invest in my leadership, I invest in your leadership. And how do we create more of a community around that, and understanding that the more that we talk about intersectionality, the more that we think about within the context of policy, what does that look like? People say, well, for example, City Hall should be a farm. All right. But how does that happen, right? So how do we talk about intersectionality? There's one thing we talk about intersectionality here, but how is that going to play out in various sectors? How does that play out? Are we talking about diversity? Are we talking about policy? And which piece of the policy spectrum are we talking about? But I think the more that we're able to create forums and opportunities to talk about, the more that we create more diversity at the table, which by hopefully creates the diversity of thought, discussion, perspective, that we can more effectively, no matter what sector we're in, begin to think about intersectionality, but understand how it connects to the broader universe.
Next question. Don't all talk at the same time.
I have a question. Kimberly made an excellent point regarding all issues are women's issues, and I know for myself, I personally always hated the term women's issues because I've always felt it siloed half the population from the other half of the population. So I'm curious to hear the thoughts from all the panelists or from one panelist regarding how do we, when we're talking about women's issues or women's leadership, I guess the advantages to using such gendered terms, which very much encompass us, but also has its liabilities when we're siloing women's leadership means this versus leadership who just happens to be women. And I come from a military background, so I very much appreciate, you know, your nuanced perspective because, you know, my upbringing was from a military background that leadership is masculine. And so when we gender women's leadership, from my perspective in the spaces that I move in, it creates a narrative that, you know, women who are leaders have very specific characteristics versus women who are in leadership just are. So I'm curious to hear the thoughts of the panelists regarding when we use gendered terms such as women's issues or women's leadership, which are very real, but the implications in terms of changing the narrative and moving the movement forward, so to speak.
I wanted to hear you talk more about it.
Sure. There's been a lot of work on that of late, and a lot of testing around verbiage, and you know that's how people started talking about equal pay for equal work versus pay equity, and it is kind of flattening the conversation so that we're not using the gendered terms. But I think in doing that, in not talking about women's leadership, I think is devalues what we bring to the table. You know, men are men, women are women, and we lead in many cases in different ways, but just as effectively. And I think when we change the construct of what we consider right, or this is what leadership is, and if you don't do it exactly as what has been the historic construct, then you're outside the mold. But I think there is some value there. I think there's a great deal of value talking about, well, you know, I'm looking at this from this perspective, and you know, for those of us who are mothers, you know, wrestling with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and getting them to do something can at times be very much like dealing with men in the workplace. And I mean, and I say that in all seriousness. I had my own consulting firm for 15 years, and how I dealt with my clients changed after I had children, because I was able to hone my negotiation skills and was able to, you know, really be able to, you know, say, okay, this is, I get where you're coming from now because I have this other experience, and I was able to, you know, be more effective for my clients, and then also be able to move them in the direction that I wanted them to without them realizing that they were moving off of their original piece. So I think there's a lot of value to that, and I think women need to kind of really embrace that. You know, you don't need to, you know, walk around throwing tampons at people, but but I think there is, you know, folks will say, oh, well, you know, why should I vote? Why should I support a woman because when there's a man who's equally qualified? It's like, well, why not? Well, why not? You know, what do you have to lose if they're equally qualified? Because their experience and how they view the world can be better for everybody.
Well, I usually say we are 52% of the population, and we give birth to the other 49%.
So everything is a woman issue, everything. And I also want to point out, have you noticed that the guy running for president had never mentioned his mother? He talked about his father all the time, never mentioned his mom. Why is that? I was thinking the other day, is it because she was born outside the United States and he went to black immigrants? His mother was an immigrant. And many other things, but I think that it is critical for the next century, for the next decade, that everything turned to the feminine route. It is critical. because we are more holistic, like you were saying before. We think more holistic. When we are planning, we think about the school, we think about the supermarket. Right now in this neighborhood, if you walk in 11th Avenue, there are right now, I would say, 8 massive construction of new building, no school, no more hospital, no more supermarket. I don't know what people eat. I go to neighborhood in New York City, I don't see a supermarket. In Washington High, my mom used to have a supermarket 2 blocks from her, it's no longer there. I have to go and shop for her. This is what we're talking about. So it's obvious there was not a female who did the planning, in my eyes, right? So this is why I'm telling you we have to transform government, because everything is politics, whether we like it or not. Where we shop is politics, because if I go shopping to a store and then mistreat me, I'm gonna come and tell you, don't go there, because those people treat black people bad, right? So everything is politics. So we have to start thinking that way. We're gonna have a new generation, or we're gonna be the majority. We are the majority, and on top of that, Latinos, we are gonna be the majority. So we have to start thinking ahead of ourselves. When it comes to policy, when it comes to planning neighborhoods, because that's why they're moving us out, the second generation. My daughter cannot live in the building where I live. We college educated. A job when I was her age was never making what she's making now. And she cannot move in the neighborhood. And not just this neighborhood, it's happening in every neighborhood in New York City, where college educated women with a good salary cannot get a decent apartment. So we have to start thinking about that. We cannot accept, all this planning. Like you wake up right now, like yesterday, I'm walking in 102nd Street, and here I see City Bank. And I'm thinking, 102nd between Lexington and 3rd. People barely have food to eat. How many people are going to take a MasterCard, put it there to take a bicycle in that neighborhood?